Good afternoon and welcome to you all to today's online debate organized by the Florence School of Banking and Finance within the initiative Bank Board Academy. The topic of the seminar today is Better Boards for Better Banks, the challenges ahead. My name is Elena Carletti. I am a professor of finance at Bocconi University, and I'm also the founding director of the Florence School of Banking and Finance. And for completeness, I am also a non-executive director at UniCredit SPA, where I have been chairing the risk committee since now for almost a year. So I am very happy to chair the debate today and would very much like to start by welcoming our speaker in order in which they will speak during today's event. First, Eduard Fernandez Polo, by now, if I may say, a friend of our school and our Bank Board Academy. Eduard is a member of the supervisory board of the ECB and has a very long experience in supervision in the French Prudential Supervisory Authority, the CPR, in the management board of the EBA, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, where he was also chairing various expert groups. Then we will have Martin Kasper, who is Director Board Services of PwC. He is a business lawyer with more than 40 years of experience in the field of corporate governance. So although he, strictly speaking, is not a board member, he's probably more knowledgeable of boards than we all are, the others are. He has an extensive experience in advisory, supervisory boards, management boards, and corporate secretaries, especially in the financial industry, but not only. And last but not least, we have Nuno Manuel de Silva Amado, who is since 2018 the non-executive chairman of BCP, the Banco Comercial Portuguese, and also vice chairman of various, I see, subsidiaries of the group. And before that, he was actually an executive. So he has also the view of being both a CEO of a bank and then becoming a board member, and see also somehow the relationship, if we may call it this way, between board member and executive, that we know is not always a demarcation line that is easy to understand, keep, and maintain throughout. So thank you to all the three of you for being here today. And we are really looking forward to the event, which will last slightly longer than usual. We will go for an hour and 15 minutes because we have three speakers and we really want to exploit the possibility to discuss with them as much as possible. Before we go back to the seminar, let me just take 1 minute for advertisement of our next event. As you may know, this event today is within the initiative of Bank Board Academy, where the goal of this initiative is to build a community of board members and people that gravitate around the boards to improve the skills of the board member, the functioning of the board, with the ultimate objective of to improve the governance and therefore also the bank performance and functioning in Europe and not only. Within this initiative, we normally organize two different types of events: online seminar as of today and training activities. So let me start by advertising the next online seminar that will be held on February 28th, slightly earlier than our usual time, 12:30, and will be on monetary policy and the Euro area economic outlook. We have a lot of debates right now on potential changes in monetary policy, and we will discuss this with the executive board member of the ECB, Fabio Panetta, and Jean Pisani-Ferry, who is a Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa chair at the European University Institute. So registrations are open. This is free of charge completely. If you want to register, please do it. Instead, the second event we would like to, if you can go one slide up, please. Yes. So instead of the second event we would like to advertise, which is more connected, if you want, to the seminar today, is our next BBA training, hopefully residential in Florence, finally, away from Zoom links, entitled Sitting on Bank Board, Suitability and Better Governance. And if you can go now one step, this will be in June 10-12. It will be divided in 4 modules: overview of banks in Europe, fit and proper assessment, so responsibility of boards and so on, board effectiveness and ongoing supervision, and culture and behavior in boards. And this will be organized by the Florence School of Banking and Finance with the European Banking Authority, the SSM, and the and the Central Bank of the Netherlands, the Dutch National Bank, that we all come and speak. And therefore, this will be a great opportunity to continue the conversation that we are doing between board members and similar people working around the board and supervisor, just to have this dialogue on the role and responsibilities of boards. With that, let me stop the advertisement and go back to the seminar today, which is actually a follow-up of a seminar we did last year. Exactly in February, I was noticing this morning, Eduard, this was the 18th of February last year. We had a seminar on fitter and proper assessment, better board for better banks. There was you, and then there was two Neds, Lara Kasser and Hans-Helmut Kotz. And today instead, we will have a follow-up in the sense that last year we were discussing the new fitter and proper guide. Today instead, now the SSM has finalized it, has published it. So today we start with a presentation by Eduard on the outline of the new guide of the fitter and proper, with a focus on what the areas that have really changed, and what are now the ECB expectation on the role of NEDs going forward. And then we start with Dan Eduard for 10-15 minutes. Then we will have Martin and then Nuno for about 5 to 7 minutes each. But the objective, I remember all of you, is really to have a conversation among the speakers and with the audience. So please, all of you interested in posing questions can do it in the Q&A chat box here at the bottom. Some of you have already sent the questions, but we are very happy to collect new ones along the way. And with this, I stop. Thank you again to all the three of you for being here. And Eduard, the floor is yours. And thanks for being back with us once again.
Thanks to you, Elena, to give me this opportunity to come back on an issue that is extremely high on the agenda of the SSM, because we really think that our action on this fit and proper, which is really one main supervisory tool that we do have for influencing the governance of banks and trying to enhance the performance of the governance of banks. We think this initiative is extremely important, and it is even more important that it is well understood, so that we have opportunities like these to explain what are the changes that we're doing, why we are doing them, what we expect be the effects of the changes. And I will try, as you said, to concentrate on what were policy changes. In this fit and proper guide, it's also a tool for managing the processes. So we also made some changes to the processes, the notification templates and things like that. But what I would like to concentrate today in the presentation and then in the discussion is what reflects, in fact, a change in the policies, an enhancement of the policies, not a wide change. It will be, I think, really completely in the line of our past discussion last year. But this has been a very important consultation. We received more than 700 contributions, and among them on the policy issues that was more than 400, my vast majority, more than 400, were concentrated on the policy issues that we were raising. So finally, after carefully thinking about all this input, at the end of last year, we produced the final version of this fit and proper guide, which we will discuss today. So if we go forward, you will see what are the essential issues that are in this new version of the guide. I leave the last one, which is the procedural one of the applications. But what is very important to the message we want to get through is that we wanted to reinforce our policy of assessment of fit and proper, especially on the side of reassessment and with a focus on individual accountability for the members of the boards. Really, I think this is, for the members of the board, this is the most important part in our policy shift. The second was to encourage banks to pursue an ex-ante policy of coordination with ECB. And let me here, I will come back in the discussion if it needed, just to say that this is, I will say, in the present framework. There are also maybe some change of the framework that will be made in CRD, but here we express some expectations for the application of the framework as it exists today, where you know certainly that there are many countries that have different laws and different procedures also for approaching the fit and proper assessment. Some are ex ante, so you submit to the supervisor, in this case the ECB, the persons that will fill the positions before they take up the position. That's the ex ante, or you do it ex post after having filled the position. So we are trying, of course, as Europeans to harmonize, and we try to harmonize in the higher standard, which is the ex ante. And a third point that I will say gained in prominence alongside the consultation, alongside the evolution of the ECB policy during last year, we are trying to be more precise on what are clearly increased supervisory expectations, both on certain kinds of expertise, and specifically last year we did put a big emphasis on climate risk expertise, and as I think I announced a bit last year, also on the issue of diversity of the boards. That means maybe the most immediate point is gender diversity, but it goes beyond gender diversity. It's the point of diversity in general. So here also there's a policy content that I think will merit some discussion. So now if we continue on this, you see how this fits into the changes that we've made in the fit and proper guide. All the issues, really the policy issues that I want to concentrate, taking climate risk, diversity, individual accountability, fit in the assessment criteria. So the assessment criteria that we use for the ongoing assessment and then the reassessment. Second, we have this new policy on reassessment that wants to clarify when we can, even if we've done an assessment, clearing someone, when we can think that there is room or there is need for reassessing someone that is already in place, which is an important part. And the last part is more on process. We have integrated climate risk in our interviews and the ex-ante approach, as I said. So now if we go to the next slide, the reassessment. The reassessment is something which always has existed, but is, of course, a marginal activity of the ECB. Just to give you the order of magnitude, we perform something like 2,600, it can change, of course, from year to year, assessment each year. So that's quite a lot. Given the number of entities that are in the supervision of the ECB, people sometimes forget that we reassess not 123 groups, but 1,000 credit institutions, and sometimes, by the way, also LSIs, when it's linked to some other procedures like authorization. So that's why we have a really big number of procedure of assessment. While reassessment, what is a reassessment? Again, is something when we have assessed someone, he is in charge, but there are reasons to look again at the clearance that we get. So clearly, this process is an extraordinary process. This is not something that happens every day. To give you also an idea, last year we have made 17 process of reassessment. So you can compare 2,600 versus 17. Of course, this is an order of magnitude. In the 17, there were more than 17 persons included, but there could have been 20. So you see that it is really very few. But these are very important processes when they take place. Because what do they mean? They mean that we have learned from or experience in supervision that there are new elements that we were not able to take into account in the assessment phase that lead us to think that this clearance that we give should maybe be withdrawn. So it's clearly a very important decision to take. So that's why we thought that this needed a clarification of the process. This is not something that we will do lightly. We will do in fact in 2 phases. Even in 3 phases, a pre-screening phase and a step 1 reassessment and a step 2 reassessment, and the formal procedure will only come on the second. What we wanted to say is that, of course, this is something that can only stem when we have some doubts, important doubts, on the criteria, on the fact that the criteria that we use for assessment are still fulfilled. So it will be triggered by important news. And as you see, we will have a very structured process to be sure of the news and to contrast the news with the persons involved, the individual persons and the bank. So that's why we don't expect this process to be very numerous even in the future. But we wanted to give a signal that this is a possibility, and to be even more clear that this could be a possibility when we learn, because of our enhanced interaction with the AML supervisors, that there could have been some issues related to conduct issues. And lately, in fact, what we've seen more is AML issues. So when we saw that there could have been shortcomings in the governance or in the ability to deal with these issues, and we learn it by sometimes ex post from the AML supervisor. This is one of the issues where clearly we will be willing, we have done in the past, and we will be willing in the future to undertake a reassessment. So I think it's an important message to be given to the population of the credit institutions. Now we go to the next slide. This question about our ex-ante approach, clearly, as I said, our motivation is essentially to try to have harmonization on the best standard. And to be honest, we think that the best standard is ex-ante, especially for the important positions. Again, we are not targeting at all 2,600 procedures. We are just targeting the most important positions in the most important parts of the groups, the CEO and executive members. And there we think that it's good for the banks, for the persons, and for ourselves that we have clarity about what is our position before the person takes a position. Because to have a reassessment lodge or a negative position ex post on this kind of position given by the ECB could be very disturbing for all the parties involved, the person, the bank, and the general concern about the reputation of the credit institution. So that's why, again, we are not changing the law, not at all. So when the law says the formal decision of the ECB will be ex post, the formal decision of the ECB will be ex post. But we encourage the banks and persons to be aware that we are expecting for these cases to have an informal phase ex ante, so that we have clarity and we don't have any problems that surface only on an ex post basis. So I think here also for the stability of all the persons involved, it will be very, very good that, again, this is an informal proceeding. It's not binding, but that the institution take advantage of this possibility to have more clarity on the position of the ECB for this kind of important functions. Now we go to the next slide. On the individual accountability, what do we want to do? Just to say, I forgot to say, this then relates to 61 groups for the ex-ante approach. This can be a change for 61 groups and only on the top level. So again, it's something that touches maybe the 300 persons in total. So not each year. Each year it could be something like 40 persons each year. So again, it's not a change of all the processes, but a change target to the most important process. The issue of individual accountability. here we wanted to clarify, because this is something that in our interaction with the members of the board is very important, is that, of course, primary, we are looking, when we are looking at an assessment of a person, we are looking at the functions they directly exercised in the board. But you know that we are very, very keen on the idea that boards should be challenging for management. So then we think it's important that the members of the board are aware that we expect them, even if we are not in charge, because they are not executive directors of the bank, but they are not in charge of a management area, to be also, to feel, to appropriate also the decisions that are taken by the board. And if there have been some severe problems in governance of the board, we are saying we will be looking at all the members of the boards and not only the executive members of the boards. And we will be looking whether their individual behavior was, I will say, the witness to this questioning behavior that we think that is important that the boards have for the management. And again, we're saying that we will take into account this individual is just saying that we will take it into account. So that doesn't mean that this is because we want to exercise opposition rights or things like that. Of course, we, like always, this is our constant approach, we will get to a possible negative decision on this issue of individual accountability when we have serious facts and when we think that facts are not mitigated. So again, we expect that to be extremely, if not non-existent, but extremely rare cases. Now we go to the next point. Climate-related and environmental risk. Well, it's been something in which you've seen last year quite an enhancement of the role of the central banks and banking supervisors like last year. This is an enhancement that will find its way in the CRD package, where there will be some specific provisions about governance of environmental risks in the for all the financial institutions, and in particular for the credit institutions in CRD. So our objective was to include already all views and our expectations there. So to, I will say, to be clear about what we will be, that we will be looking for this expertise to be represented on the board. And that means that for the fit and proper, we will be asking for the members that want to join the board of credit institution, whether they have this experience there and whether they can thus contribute to the collective suitability of the board. And that's why we clearly said we will, in the interviews that we perform, we will include things on that now on. So if we go diversity, I think last year, I think I remember I just pointed out that we were not at all at ease with the results of the EBA action, the EBA survey that they did of the practices, were because we saw that there was a lot of credit institutions. Credit institutions were better than payment institutions, but that was not comfort for us. There were a lot of credit institutions where there were not even diversity goals. And there were some where the diversity goals were, to say it bluntly, off the mark, were not meaningful. So we, because we have already a basis on CRD there, we have in this guide now formalized the idea that we will be looking, and we will be looking with clearly considering it as a priority, that in fact, many years after CRD were changed, now all the banks should have a diversity policy, a meaningful diversity policy, and they should implement it. And by the way, we will also look at the application of national laws when they are, because there are some national laws that are more ambitious than others, and we will be looking at that, because I think we we need also to be sure that the best practices do are spread in the Eurozone. So we will be looking on the basis of CRD. That's clearly our common basis that we will approach everywhere, and we will be looking also at further enhancement that can be at the national level. Remember that we can enforce, or we can use also national laws in governance issues. So here we will then, the purpose again of diversity, just to be clear, the purpose of diversity is to enhance the collective suitability of the boards, to ensure that there is enough diversity of experience, of skills, of also roles that are taken up in a different manner for the banks, because we think it's a key issue of their strength, and that diversity, enhancing diversity, is enhancing the resilience of the banks. And this is our point of view. This is the objective that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you,
Eduardo. I've already taken notes of a lot of questions I would like to ask you, but I will refrain myself. Let's go to Martin quickly. I remind you 5 to 7 minutes maximum, because we really want to have a discussion. Please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very, very much, Elena, for having me here today. And also many thanks, Edouard, for the very interesting and insightful presentation. Very, very good to hear from the first hand from the writers what the expectations and the ideas are behind the new guide. And I would like to first say as a first response that I believe that the new fit and proper guide reflects many practical challenges in staffing bank boards. This is because these challenges stem from the key challenges of work that boards as a whole face today, and that I can see in my daily work as well. And I also think that the idea of an ex-ante approach might help banks in future nomination processes to better understand ECB expectations at an early stage of the nomination process. This was not easy each and every time in the past, and it led to some uncertainties in many institutions. By the way, also in cases of non-executive directors who are not already covered by the new approach, as far as I understand. But maybe this is an idea for the future as well. I know it's a question of capacities, but I know that there are a lot of question marks in some nomination processes regarding the expectations of ECB and also of local authorities in smaller institutions. I would now like to pick out just a few points about board composition that are also reflected in the fit and proper guide. And I'm doing so with a focus in particular on non-executive directors, as this is my main area of expertise. I'm convinced that their composition, the composition of the boards from the NED perspective, and thus also the professional skills of NEDs must be derived from the tasks to be performed by the board. And these tasks are, of course, changing. They are becoming more and more specific and challenging. First example, dealing with ESG issues and climate risks. I think it's a very important example, and it's now mentioned accordingly in the guide, as we heard from Edouard. And of course, banks are facing fundamental challenges in dealing with ESG and climate risks. The requirements of regulators and supervisors are enormous and will continue to increase. And of course, this means that the board also needs sufficient expertise in this area. However, this example also shows that defining sufficient expertise is not always easy. So what constitutes ESG or climate risk expertise? What does that mean? And do we need one explicit climate change or ECG expert among NEDs? Or is it rather a sufficient basic understanding of these issues by all members? I personally tend toward the second, and that is also how I understand the ECB and the guide, that it's a question of collective suitability and not having the one and only ESG expert on the board. NEDs, to be clear. Of course, in executive boards or in executive positions, you need someone who is in charge for this. In general, by the way, I think we should be careful in searching for more and more experts for individual areas. At least here in Germany, so I'm based in Frankfurt. We now need, just to give you some examples, 2 financial experts by law, one with accounting expertise, one with auditing expertise. We need a risk expert, a compensation expert, you all know that. At the same time, all banks are facing enormous challenges in digitalization, for example, which must also be addressed by the board. And if we take single experts, if a single expert is needed for each and every topic, the board's collective responsibility for all topics is becoming maybe increasingly unclear, but it remains. There is a common responsibility from all NEDs and all board members. I believe because of this that also focusing on the collective suitability of the board is of particular importance, not only the suitability of each and every member in detail. This, I think, is also critical because diversity on the board is, of course, becoming more and more important, and we heard that from Edouard as well. And the more individual attributes we demand from a non-executive director, so contribution to diversity, certain special expertise, sufficient time for the mandate. Of course, I think there's nothing new in the guide, but the rules are clear. It's more detailed now, but the rules are not new. The individual accountability as described by Edouard, namely that further findings that are not directly related to the person are also could be also problematic. The more difficult with all these items, the more difficult the search for suitable persons becomes. Because, and I think this should also not be forgotten, of course, all NEDs also need a sufficient expertise and understanding of the banking business, right? So it's not having experts for this and that without any linking to or any linkage to banks business, because it's not enough to be an ESG expert, but not to understand what banks are doing and challenges banks are facing, just to stay in this example. I think these multiple requirements then often have to be met under special framework conditions. So the legal form of the bank, its ownership structure, the size of the board are just some of the factors that can also influence the actual composition of the board and the room of decision making when it comes to appointment processes. But all in all, I would say the challenges in the nomination of non-executive directors and also executives are increasing constantly. Unfortunately, and maybe the guide and of course ECB are playing a role in this as well, this also means an increase in the amount of documentation required. And this also applies, by the way, to the regular internal reassessments. So not the reassessments mentioned by Edouard, but the reassessments that have to be done yearly or any other year by the boards themselves. But of course, I know that this is something that will not be possible to be changed completely. We have these rules, we need to fulfill these rules, and at the bottom line, I think the rules are good ones and are the right ones. Because for me, it seems important that it's not just about documentation, but there is a further professionalization in the nomination process. It is a good thing when the nomination committee really thinks about what mix of skills, experience, diversity, etc. is needed for the board. And I actually see a lot of evidence of this development in practice. And I think that is a positive development, and it is in line with what the ECB wants to aim with the fit and proper guide, and which is in line with the EBA guidelines, the EBA guidelines, and so on and so forth. So I think a positive development, because a good and professional nomination process can also improve corporate governance overall. That is something I'm really sure about. So I would have many more thoughts on this, many more points, but I will leave it at that for now and look forward to the discussion afterwards. And so thank you very much so far And I think Nuno is on stage now.
Thank you, Martin, very much. I fully share your view on the trade-off, and I see that in the chat there are already comments on it. On one hand, requiring more skills that may increase the individual, if you want, a responsibility and accountability of the board member, but on the other hand, it certainly harms the collective accountability, because otherwise you have just individuals that are able to take decisions, but not collectively. And I would like that we go back to this also in the context of the functioning of the committees versus the functioning of the board, because ultimately that also where this plays a role. So committees are not decision-making bodies, but it's where really the expertise are, and the sharing sometimes in the whole board is not that easy, especially on topics where expertise is really required. But before we open the discussion, let's go to Nuno. I remind you again, 5 to 7 minutes, because we are really eager to enter now in the discussion. Please, Nuno. You are on mute, Nuno. You are on mute. Yes, go.
Thank you. Thanks to be with. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you. I tried not to be. I try to be fast, but not running. Let's put things like that. 3 preliminary notes, generic ones, and then I have 10 specific points to have an opinion. First, this is my personal perspective, and it is important to understand that we probably is not similar to the core one. Basically, we are from we are medium-sized bank, a small medium-sized bank, 100 billion euros of assets from the periphery. So we went through a sovereign and the banking crisis. So I have a very specific point on this. Because of that, the second point is clear. To me, for many years, the governance is a key issue. I believe that one of the key problems of the Portuguese banking sector in the past was related with governance and with good governance. And I have no doubt that good governance is an important aspect of the stronger banking architecture, and that the fit and proper process is in the base of that, is on the foundation. So my experience confirms that, and I have no doubt the importance of this process. It is also clear that we will receive the letter from the SSM, and it is clear that one of the priorities to develop and implement a policy on diversity and a risk-based approach to fit and proper assessment. So obviously this is one of the key aspects. Third and last generic point, I know the importance of internal governance. I understand fit and proper key issue on this process. However, don't forget, and this is much more for regulated and supervisors, level playing field. We cannot have a lot of complexity and requirements for Eurobanks and much lighter approach to entities that compete with us on the geographies or in certain areas. So please take in consideration the level playing field. Now entering what I call the 10 points that I would like to highlight, and I recall this is a personal view, probably is not a generic view. My first point is obviously the process now is much more clear, is much more practical and detailed, and the last year update clarified and enhanced it. So the first conclusion is we are much better now than we were before. However, there is a problem or an issue that I would like to highlight in the beginning. This is, in certain jurisdictions, we have a 30 days formal rule. This 30 days formal rule is not realistic. I would suggest that we should have, as we have, because this is the agreement that we have with our team, a 90 days principle that is, in my opinion, should be in fact applied and formalized. This 90 days rule, I think, is correct. I think my recommendation is that when the dialogue starts, it should be intense. I have to say that I prefer an intense, direct and straightforward process than a long and more administrative one. So first point, a 90 days rule makes sense but it should be intense. Second, the importance of a knowledgeable and reputed management team, namely the importance of the executive directors. They manage the bank day to day. The NEDs are important, and the executive directors, in my opinion, are vital. It's important to keep in mind these differences during the process, and I'm not sure that this is sufficiently recognized on the guide. The third point is that, as I think Martin mentioned, each bank is different. We have different origins, different shareholders, different markets, different business models. So I think as part of the supervisor's responsibility, and I think it's what is happening, at least in my experience, we have to have the guide, but I expect that later in the process, decisions are also aware of the specificity of each entity. Four, I think when I went through the questionnaire in December, January, and I think the question is much more focused on the management functions and on the candidates that already know the bank than the newcomers, let me tell you that. And there is an excessive focus, in my opinion, on previous experience on banking. I'm not sure if the objective of more diversity is so present in this very important phase of the process, but I call your attention for that on the questionnaire and on the matrix, probably the diversity should have a more important role. Fifth point is clear. When we have standard rules, we have the risk to have a one model fits all. I know that the ECB is aware of this, SSM is aware of this. Please, this one model fits all is not exactly what I think it's the right decision. So this is just a reminder. Sixth point, in my view, the CEO and chairman roles are critical. Are they sufficiently segregated in the fit and proper process? I'm not sure, at least in the process and on the guidelines. I'm sure that is on the decision-making process, but I'm not sure if it's in the guidelines. Seven, the CRO, in my opinion, and I have more executive board experience than chairman, 30 years against 4. I would say that CRO function is also of great importance. His professional and personal characteristics are very important. Does it deserve a specific point in the process? I think so. 8th point, there is the need to define the number of hours that the NEDs plan to allocate to the function. Usually a NED has other commitments, is not a full-time job. And when I review the complexity of what is required today to the boards, the commissions, the board, all this complexity of all matters that should go through the board, I don't know if there is not an increasing consistency between a part-time job for a NED and what is expected by the supervisors. Are the supervisors aware of this possible difficulty? 9th point, and I'm almost finishing. I would say that when a new board member, when a new board member comes to the board, it is clear that I believe that a larger importance to his contribution should be done on 1 or 2 years later on our own self-evaluation process that we do every year. So I think that should be taken care also on the future guidelines. 10th and last point, I would say that a 90 days period, as I mentioned, is a good period for the dialogue and the approval process or refusal process. But in my opinion, it's very important that since the beginning, there is a direct involvement of senior structure of the GST, because in the SSM, why? It is clear, because the key issues should be analyzed upfront and it's better, as I mentioned, an intense process than a longer and more administrative one. In summary, fit and purpose is key. The evolution is very positive, and there is much more clarity right now. And I believe that it should be given some better approach to the difference between NEDs and executive directives, in spite of the collective responsibility. I have no doubt about that. And also a more focused approach on key functions as the ones that I mentioned before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nuno. I mean, now we are full of food for thought, so to say. So, Eduardo, would you like to give a first reply? Maybe, I don't know if you want to select some of the points. Certainly one is the one on diversity, new net, complexity, increase in skills. So up to you, and then we open up. And we have already lots of questions, so please. You are mute.
Of course. Sorry. Let me just pick 3 points, and then the others will come, I am sure, with the discussion. The first, because it was the first raised also, and I think it's a very important one, is how to balance collective and individual responsibility. And here, of course, a role of expertise with the role of just general participation in the board. It's true that we want both. It's absolutely true that we want both. But we are, I think, we are not looking at it from the same point of view. We need expertise to incorporate the proposals. We need expertise for the running of the bank. Absolutely clear. This is a profound expertise. But so, for instance, it's clear, and here I am okay with Nuno, and this is it's not the same expertise that we look at when you will be an executive director and a non-executive director. To have an operating day-to-day thing in the bank, you need expertise. So there is the subset of the management directors, those who are executive directors, where expertise is absolutely key. Expertise is something that we need, and here the track record and experiences of having positions is extremely important. What we want from the others is also the challenging. The challenging and the diversity, these are more specific things for the net. So this is where we are looking at. And so then afterwards, and this I go to the point of Nuno, it will be very focused on each bank, because we'll see the composition of how the bank is and how it does experience. Does it lack people that challenge, or does it lack experience? It's not will be the same thing in a bank. So here it's an equilibrium that has to be reached and maybe at different points for different banks. What is clear here in the guide, we are giving very broad things, so we are inclining for the both things, but then the particular equilibrium should be bank by bank made. So that's my point on the first idea, which is again extremely important for us. Then the second is, in Nuno said you should be more precise on the guidelines. Just an afterthought of what I've just said. It's impossible. It's already very big guidelines. So this tailoring to the individual case, this should be done by the dialogue, the particular dialogue between the bank and the. Have we given the appropriate messages? The guidelines are there to give the general message. I'm speaking today with you. This is it. So again, we can think that there should be some fine tuning later on. We will learn from the experience, and may at some point, for instance, we are developing stance on diversity. Diversity is something that is very new. So we will come back on the issue of diversity certainly later, because we have to complete what we've done, which is essentially on gender and not very much for the time being. So we will have time to adjust. We will adjust about taking in mind what are the priority message we want to give to the industry. And again, today, the priority message that we want to give to industry is we need more expertise for risks that are emerging. And we need, and that could go also for executive and this and more expertise for risks that are emerging and more diversity for the global functioning of the bank so that they are more challenging. These are the two priorities that we want to reflect in the guidelines, and maybe will be there afterwards. And the third point, which is the effectiveness, also raised by Nuno, the effectiveness of the process, and you prefer intense rather than long. We do, and that's why we are putting the onus. We are trying to change for this ex-ante approach, because in the ex-ante approach we commit to have in much shorter time, but of course it will be a more intense engagement. Again, we cannot do the 2,600 assessments each year in the same way, but we are committing for the most important parts. We really are committing to this model of previous, more early and more intense and more short and more intense engagement. We are conscious of it, but again, we'll try again in practice to live up to this ideal of intense and less administrative processes. In 2,600, there will be a part that is just reassessment of people we know a lot, so it's purely administrative. There will be a part administrative. We'll try to concentrate where there are issues.
But let me come back. Thank you, Eduardo. Let me come back on one specific point that I think Martin raised, and also in the Q&A, where now we have almost 20 questions. How much do you really need the board member to be expert of something? So in Martin's words, he asked, I think, do you need a basic knowledge on a particular topic, take environmental, or do you need one real expert and the others doesn't really matter what they know, if I put it to the extreme? What would be your ideal composition? Because you feel challenging, executive is not running things, but in order to challenge, you need the basic knowledge of things.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it gets
this is what I was saying. My ideal is that we have enough people that challenge the in-house experts. This is what we need, to challenge, not to redo. Not to do the thing that the expert, the bank should have experts. We are clearly asking the banks to reinforce their expertise in climate risk, to be clear, on the financial consequences of climate risk. So you need to have the experts. We need people that challenge, because what we don't know is, because I am not an expert, I'm not an expertise, I don't challenge. We need people that see that their role is challenging, and to challenge, you need a basic degree of, I will say, acquaintance, I will not say expertise, acquaintance with the matter. So you are asking the good questions.
But then how do we prove to you that the board members are expert of something or acquainted of something? Do we do trainings within boards? Are trainings enough? How do you expect to measure the expertise, for example, on ESG matter? And then there are many other questions related to, but do we need also expertise on AML? Do we need expertise on digitalization? So then the level of expertise, of course, increases. So for each of these topics, how do you expect to measure expertise?
Again, we are looking for, when we think an expertise, and this question clearly shows it, we are looking at least two different things. Matter expertise in order to very, very deep involvement, and second, ability to challenge. And ability to challenge is ability to challenge also from an external point of view. This is very important. Take the issue that I'm sure will be gaining in relevance in all banks of greenwashing. Greenwashing. You need some expertise to be able to detect that maybe it's not at all. But you also need the point of view of the people outside that say, this is confusing. This is leading me to an idea that is maybe not real. So you need the consumer points of view, and you need the producer points of view. And you need to have people that can challenge the bank on these 2 points. So for the consumer point of view, we are not asking any expertise. We're just asking to have a challenging mind, to ask you a question. Do I understand it clearly? What does that mean? People that do that. And for the expertise, what we need is to, because people don't change because they sit at the board. Of course, a track record of having been interested in some matter is good for us. You maybe not be a scientist on expert on environmental things, but if we can see that you are interested in that you have done some something that is related to these issues before, this is a kind of expertise that for a net could be perfectly fine. Not for the one that will devise the model of credit loss given climate risk.
No, sure. This is not the type of expertise. I hope this is not the type of expertise.
No, this is, we are not looking at the border.
Yeah. Martin, if I can ask you a question. So do you see, given that you are more involved in the search and in the judgment or the review of the boards, how do you see the attraction of boards going? I mean, do you find it easy for people to be attracted to boards? Some people say it's not paid enough, it's too much responsibility. And in particular, and this goes back also to Eduard, also for the individual accountability, how attractive is it to go to a bank which is not very sound, if I may say so, where maybe maximum more expertise would be needed, but it's certainly less attractive? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think there's also no one size fits all answer on this. Of course, there are two perspectives. For very large banks, very complex structures, complex groups, it's on the one hand not easy to find people with the relevant expertise in all the aspects we've talked about, particularly with an eye on time commitment. Because when we look back 10, 15, 20 years, I mean, it was really common that people with being in executive positions in other companies went to NED positions in banks and other major corporates, and let's say doing this as a side activity. And I think these times are over, and I think that's good and that's okay in terms of professionalization. But on the other hand, of course, it's a bit more difficult to find people with the right understanding and the right the right expertise on how such complex and big groups are functioning. And it couldn't be the solution to search for people who left their executive positions 10 years ago because the world changed. And if you talk about ESG and climate risk, that's just one example. You need to be on the level of debate which is currently going on. It's less a thing of attraction than of time commitment in major institutions, I would say. In smaller ones, I'm not pretty sure. I have the feeling that some candidates and also some NEDs who are in NED position tend to argue, oh, that's too complicated, too much documentation, too much regulation, I don't want to do this job. In practice, I have the feeling it's still okay to find people doing these jobs. It's also part of the game to say it's too much and it's too complicated. But it's harder to find NEDs than it was in the past, also in smaller institutions. And it's harder to find people with relevant banking knowledge, to be honest. Particularly, I mean, I'm from Germany, my English is not the best as well. We are very language dominated in the German market. So the normal step would be to find international candidates, right, from abroad with the relevant expertise, with the relevant knowledge. And for a lot of them, it's a hurdle to go to Germany to have board meetings maybe in German, or to find institutions who are not willing to change into English or another language. We have co-determination. That's another thing which makes it more complicated. So I would say, yes, it's a bit harder, but don't. I wouldn't scandalize it and would say it's impossible to find NEDs. Maybe one other thing, and maybe that's related to this, and I find it very, very interesting what Edouard said before. I have the feeling that one core issue is that there are two different impressions in the market. On the one hand, the one impression is I have to prove each and everything. I have to formalize it. I have to document it. The ECB fit and proper guide is now 90 pages and not 60 pages, and EBA guidelines are not 60 pages, but 100 pages, and so on and so forth. So this leads to the impression everything is so formalized and so complicated. When I hear the key message from Edouard, what is important to the ECB, we want to emphasize the need for collective suitability. We want to need to emphasize the need for diversity. And what I understand, Edouard, is we want to emphasize some kind of mind shift, which couldn't take place from today to tomorrow, but which is a process over months and years. I think that's a different message. And I think when people and when institutions get more from this message and understand this message, the willing to change and the willing to think about all the things is higher than when they read 100 pages of guide and think, well, that's all formalization. I'm talking black and white now, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important to set this message again and again. What's the overarching goal of what you do?
I personally would agree with that, and I'm sure Eduardo will also probably agree with this, right?
Yeah, yes, completely. But just the problem is we have to perform different functions. We have a big push and demand for clarity. I want detail. I want to know, to be sure that I'm doing the right thing. Yeah. We don't write because we are happy 100 pages. It's because we have to answer the questions that we have been given, and they say, please be more precise. Please describe better what you do. So there's a bit which I can understand. So that it's a legitimate thing that addressed to a supervisor, that it's clear, explain itself, and like it. So we need documents that make 100 pages. I will not tell you the number of pages that we give to the would-be supervisor when he arrives, but because it's bordering 1,000 pages he has to read just to sit and begin to be a supervisor, because of all the things that we've published in different issues. But we need that. We need that as a reference, that people that really want to go deep in something can have a detail. And the other side, we need events like these, and we are trying to develop communication through blogs, to press conferences, to give the messages. Exactly. Because here you can summarize, say, well, there are two things that are important. This is that cannot be a guide. That is not a guide to the applications of fit and proper, but that is the policy message we try to do in speeches, in interventions like this, in blogs. This is what I hope you will find more along the way, because we are conscious that too much information kills the information. So when we are too detailed, we lose the global picture. So, but we need to be on both fronts.
No, I share the view that it's very difficult, and I also share the view that from the side of the board and the net, they would really like to be almost told what exactly they should be doing, because we would know what to do. But going back to two other points quickly. One is about in the countries where the appointment is still exposed, and you stress instead the importance of ex ante. One question is, how many days, weeks, months should the credit institution do and submit the FMP assessment before the beginning of the board members' mandate in the countries where formally this would be exposed? So what's your expectation on the ex ante?
Our expectation is not a formalized one, because I know this is not a formal definition, is as soon as you are sure that this is the one that you want. We are not trying to link it because it's an informal process. It's not a formal approval that has a very legal defined trigger point. It's as soon, it's better for us for the person involved, for the bank, for all of us, it's better that as soon as you can come.
Okay. And then let me go back to a question that was raised by Nuno, and also Alessandro Merli raises it again in the Q&A box, which is, Nuno said, this is not anymore a part-time job almost, but in some cases, it's a full-time job. And I have to share my personal experience. When I became chair of the risk committee, this became for me a full-time job completely. I'm hardly able to do anything else right now. Yeah. So what is your expectation in this? I mean, what would you expect also in terms of time? Because that, again, decreases enormously the attractiveness of this position in a way.
Well, we have set minimum time commitment standards that we are using in the guidelines. Again, we were very conscious when we began, and this is maybe also because of the widespread model that Martin had just mentioned, that there was, I would say, boards like socializing clubs for high executives of the big listed companies. To be clear, there was nice talk with the intelligent persons, and that's all. So this model, we wanted to say it's over. That's why we said minimum time commitment. But unfortunately, maybe for some, we are resisting very much to dictate the precise time, because we don't want to dictate to the persons what to do, because we are not on a publicly driven economy. So there should be some leeway and some part of it. We are ready to learn from the expectation, but we'll be reluctant to be more directive on that. We have already our minimum time commitments. We really are keen on that. And this is one of the issues that we really proceed. And sometimes we are seen as very administrative. Yes, why are you bothering you with us? In reality, things don't. Yeah, but we want to give the message that a minimum time commitment, this we take serious. Then, yeah, there's a collective board. So if you're taking too much time, maybe someone else is not taking enough time in the board. So that can be.
This is a good way. Is a good way of putting the issue. Let me come to another point, and let me also involve Nuno on the discussion, which is more on board dynamics. So we have been talking a lot about individual suitability and everything, but somebody can be a very good expert in something. So being individual, very expert and accountable, but maybe be less good in team working or in collective, if you want, a decision-making process. Nuno, do you see this as an issue? Do you see this as not an issue? What's your view coming from, not your board personally, but overall, also from the ones you have seen as a CEO?
I think that is an issue, but in my view, the key issue usually is not that. In my view, usually the key issue is difficulty to consolidate in one person. Usually is difficult. Both functions, the control and supervising function and the challenging function. I really think that a good board has to have these two functions, Elena, in my view. And it's difficult, in my view, a good mix on these two characteristics. And sometimes the supervisors, they question why someone didn't challenge enough, but probably that person has a very good skills to control and supervision that is also important. And in other moments, there are people that challenge well, but has not the right profile. So I would say, Elena, that in my experience, good generic skills are more important than very specialized skills for boards. It's not for all functions, but for many functions. Second, time availability is very critical. Second, don't try to find all the characteristics in all board members. Try to get a good mix of characteristics. It's not easy, but sometimes this in the dialogue is why I think the dialogue with senior GST and SSM people is important. That in the dialogue we can try to fine tuning the characteristics of a board, but we have to have in consideration that, as I mentioned, one of the most difficult things to do is the challenging, and the challenging now is more on the agenda of the supervisor. But in the past, I would say that control and supervision was more on the agenda for nets. So is the balance that is good. I cannot give another answer to your question, Elena.
So you mean that we now rely a lot as board on the working and the supervision of the ECB? And
we think we have other, no, we rely on, the ECB sees everything. The SSM sees everything. External auditors are seeing everything. We have a very detailed quarterly report on the critical points. So it's a question of time availability and common sense to see that. Yeah. Challenge is more difficult. You understand? Yeah. But we have to have a mix of both characteristics in the board, in my view. Some people as both characteristics, some of them as not. The mix is important.
Martin, how do you see that, given that you review a lot of boards? And what about board dynamics in your view?
Well,
so, Casper, sometimes, sorry, that's my experience, more than if you are totally right in direction that you take, is more important to see if you are in the right direction in terms of risk profile, in terms of business model. That is, I think, the key issues for, at least in my experience, my past experience.
Thanks, Martin, would you share?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. And that's one of the main issues boards are facing at the moment. They try, and not voluntarily, but they have the feeling that they need to be the better supervisor or auditor or whatever what Nuno mentioned, and you cannot be that as a board, because it's not a full-time job. You don't have the resources. You are not so much in detail like the auditor is, like the supervisors are. I think the balance between supervising executives, let's say it this way, by the NEDs, in a more formal way and in a way of compliance, and on the other hand, dealing with strategies, with risks, with the real business the executives are doing, challenging these issues, but also advising executives from this NED perspective is key. And I think board dynamics sometimes are killed by the impression that board work is more or less doing supervision in a very technical way. And I think this is not the expectation by the legislator. It's not the expectation by the ECB. It's not the expectation by anyone else. It's more or less a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are a lot of rules, and we have to supervise the rules and how the rules are fulfilled, and then we are kind of a supervisor, and we don't discuss on business issues and on how to develop a bank that is fit for the future. So this is, I think, one aspect, and it's with the NEDs themselves, and also with executives and the functions who are preparing the boards to set the right agenda balance. And on the other hand, in terms of board dynamics, I mean, one difficult question, of course, is size of the boards. Because is the board too big? There's no dynamics. Is it too small? You don't have the broad diversity of experiences, then there's also no dynamics. So I think this is also very, it is a difficult aspect to find the right size of a board, the right cooperation with the committees. So not to give everything to the committees, but on the other hand, to have committees as a more dynamic, smaller group. So I think these are major challenges. And a lot of them has have to be solved by the boards themselves. It couldn't be the expectation.
It cannot be the ECB telling us exactly how to run our board. So we can't expect them to say exactly how the meetings should look like. Yes, please.
May I react, because it is extremely important for us. We are not asking you to be the supervisors. You are in a much closer functions that we can't. You define the strategy of the bank. You have a positive role. We are there only to criticize. We are supervising ex post against a set of public objectives. But the ones that you are driving the bank, this is an essentially positive role. And the supervision for you is just the way you contribute to the guiding of the bank, while the supervision for us, it's what we are paid for. This is it's a role and against a public policy objective. You are in charge of the definition of the bank. So that's why it's completely different. We are expecting you to challenge, but to challenge from the inside, and to define by this challenge, to help defining the strategy of the bank. The thing we should never do as public policy holders and external supervision, we should not be defining the policy of the banks as the strategy. This is essential for the consistency of our function, for the integrity of our function. So we are not making unethical, mixing of roles. It's very important. So that's why we need you. We need you, not you to do the work we are doing, but starting from the work we are doing, which I think can be useful for you from your point of view, which is how do I take that to redefine, to help contributing to defining the strategy of the bank. And let me just, because I wanted the opportunity to tell, in our priorities for the next years, precisely this is exactly what we are asking for the government. We are saying we have 3 priorities for supervision and for the banking system in the next years. It is not to be complacent in the post-pandemic crisis about the issue of risk, because in fact we are at the highest level of the financial. We are in a really paradoxical situation. We had a very big economic crisis, the sharpest decline of the economy in general that we've seen since the war. But the financial cycle is at the height, with valuations in top, provisions extremely low, everything giving money. So this is the moment to be cautious. The first thing is to have cautious for the moment of the cycle that we are, because it's the second is because we are in a moment of transformation that in the strategy does address the structural weaknesses of the banking sector in Europe, and we know we have a lot of structural weaknesses. The profitability, globally speaking, the digitalization, we're lacking a bit in investment in digitalization, in transformation, and the third is that the emerging risk, those that are on the growth side that have not yet materialized, should be tackled also in the strategy, because for strategy is forward look. So what we are asking in all our priorities, what we need is that the strategy incorporates this not short-term view, a forward-looking view positively. Climate risk is not just something to declare things, but how do I change my business because of that? And how do I define positively to the people that are running the bank how they do it? We will not do that. We cannot do that. It will be extremely damageable for everybody that we try to do that. So we need you to do that. But we need you to have the skepticism and the dialogue that is necessary to adapt, because for the ones that are running the bank day to day, it's human. I'm not criticizing it. It's human that they are more on the what happens every day, and to reformulate the strategy with a forward-looking view. I think this is where the critical contribution of the board, which is critical but positive, is essential, and something we are looking forward, but we cannot deliver. We are looking for you to deliver.
Thank you for the responsibility. Nuno, I think you wanted to say something. I know we are already over time, but it's much too interesting. Please, last word to Nuno.
2 minutes. I could be more in agreement what Eduard mentioned right now. I think the key issue of the board is also define the strategy of the business, strategy of the control environment, the strategy of the risk approach. I have no doubt about that. I fully agree that is necessary, forward-looking. Challenging is critical. However, I call your attention, I'm sorry, but it's my personal experience, that we have different levels of requirements from the local authorities, from different local authorities, from the SSM, from the SRB, from many authorities. And what we have right now, I did an interview with all my board members in December. And one of the criticisms that I received, Nuno, we have a too large regulatory agenda in the board because all the recommendations have to go through the board, all the on-site inspections have a lot of recommendations to go to the board. In my opinion, you should, with the banking world, try to find the European Banking Federation to discuss this. The requirements for one side, regulatory, legal, on the different levels, from the local to the European, and the objectives that the board should have. So this balance, I think, is now a little bit overweighted on the regulatory side. My view. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my view. Maybe Elena can give her experience.
Let me not comment on this. I do believe this is a little bit of a shared feeling, Eduardo, if I may say, that we, whereas you put a lot of emphasis on the fact that we should focus on strategy, it's undoubtedly true that the regulatory requirement, the supervisory do put a lot of requests in terms of time in boards simply. And indeed, depending on the governance structure of the different boards in the different countries, boards are sometimes asked to, to really approve whatever. I mean, something that is extremely technical. So while I take your point on saying you are not supervisor, you're not executive, I do believe boards are called sometimes to approve things which are extremely technical. And in the relation with the JST, we are sometimes asked on technical aspect as well. So whereas I share your view, your broad view, saying, yes, we should be focusing on the key and the challenges and so on, I think, I'm sure many board members tell you that in the way, also when we personally interact with JST, we feel very much that you, ECB, consider us a little bit as executive, while as you say, we are not and we should not be. But this, I think we should leave for another seminar because now it's time to end. I do want to deeply thank all the three of you. This has been a very interesting discussion. We have lots of questions. I'm sorry we didn't manage to go through all of them. One that I wanted to ask Eduardo was, what are you doing for overcoming this diversity issue? There are some EBA representatives that somehow suggest next time you will be asked to provide them with evidence of what you have done to change the diversity policy in the board. But let me stop here. Let me thank all those that participated and you. And for those of you interested, in June, we will have further occasion to discuss further with the ECB. There will be Frank Elderson then, but we will also have Eduard as a host, as a guest soon again in our event. And thanks to Martin and thanks to Nuno for being with us today.